Turn your face into the east wind, and if you could see forever, you would see Ivan's land. It is a land where summer is short and pale like a celandine, winter long and cold as an icicle. Ivan does not live there now, for he grew old long ago and is gone. But the people of the pine woods remember him. They remember him all the time, but most of all, they remember him in winter, because they are not afraid of winter anymore. They have no need to be afraid because of something Ivan did when he was very small. Ivan and his brother lived in the house of their father, the blacksmith, in a village in the shadow of the great dark forest. The people of the village were poor, but in the summertime they were mostly happy, so that the pale warm air rang with their laughter and their singing as they worked. But as the short summers gave way to autumn, their songs became sad songs, and their laughter thin, for they knew that far away to the north, Starjik was greasing the runners of his sled and rounding up his wolves. Starjik, whisper his name, and it was winter in your heart. Hissing over crisp snow in the black of night came Starjik behind his hungry team. Their eyes were yellow and their fangs were white. When Starjik was in a village, the people lay very still behind their shutters. But always in the morning a child was gone. For Starjik was known in every Pinewoods village as the child taker, and those he took were never seen again. One night, when an icy wind whined through the black trees and powdery snow sifted under everybody's doors, Starjik came to Ivan's house. And when Ivan awoke in the morning, his little brother was gone. All the village wept for the blacksmith and his wife, and for little Ivan, who must now play alone. And little Ivan walked in Starjik's sled tracks to the end of the village and stood there a long time, gazing into the north. That evening at supper time, while his mother and father were not looking, Ivan took some of the dark bread from the big wooden board on the table and slipped it into his pocket. Then he said, "Mother, I am very tired. I will sleep now." His mother lighted a candle for him, and he carried the little flame into his room. For a long time he sat on his bed, listening to the small noises his parents made beyond the door of his room and to the wind outside. The wind made a sad, lonely sound, and as he listened, it seemed to Ivan that something was crying out there in the night. Something small and frightened that touched his window and moved away along the wall, and he lifted a corner of the window curtain and pressed his face to the cold glass and whispered, "Wait, little brother, I will not leave you. I am coming." His breath made a cloud on the glass, and there was only the wind. He let the curtain fall, blew out his candle, and climbed into bed without taking off his clothes. After a while, the door of his room was opened quietly, and Ivan pretended to be sleeping, while his mother smoothed his quilt, kissed him, and went out, closing the door behind her. Soon after that, the unhappy couple went to their room and the house was still. Ivan slipped out of bed and pulled on his boots. Then he took his fur parka and moved quietly to the door. Moments later, he was across the warm, dark kitchen and out into the freezing wind. Next morning, the people were awakened by a terrible cry from the blacksmith's house. The blacksmith's wife had crept early into Ivan's room and found his bed empty. All that day, the people stood about the village in groups talking, but nobody had heard Starjik come again, and nobody could remember having known anyone as unlucky as the blacksmith and his wife. And far away through the forest and over the hill walked Ivan. He wore his fur parka, and between his teeth he held a squirrel tail, for if he had not, the wind would have frozen his breath into a mask of ice on his face. Ivan was afraid. He was more afraid than he had ever been, for nobody had ever seen Starjik's land and lived to return home. His head was bowed, and he cried a little as he went along, and his tears became pips of ice before they touched the snow. He was afraid, and sometimes he almost turned around to follow his footprints back to his father's house. But then he would see in his mind a picture of his brother holding out his arms and crying in a place that was cold beyond imagining, and then Ivan would brush away his tears and go on. On and on he went, and when it began to grow dark, he found a snowdrift and tunneled into it as his father had taught him. Outside, the screaming wind drove blizzards of snow across the darkness, but Ivan slept safe and warm in his shelter. When morning came, he dug himself out, ate a little food from his pocket, and looked all around. His footprints were gone, and the wind had shifted the snowdrift into a new pattern, so that he could not tell which way he had come. He sighed, turned his face into the wind, and walked on. The snow was deeper now, and Ivan's feet sank far beneath its surface with every step. He began to feel tired, and to wonder if he would ever see his home again. He was thinking longingly about his chair by the big hot stove when there came a sound that felt like an icicle in his heart.